Oh, okay, it says it's on. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, using the dicey camera. Um, yeah, sorry. Modern Mystic economy stuff. Asked for questions. And, yeah, so, this really has to do with this idea, okay, that we're in this dilemma as human beings where, we like this idea of having some sort of immediate gratification. It's hard for us to do things for the future. Even if we had to sacrifice something ourselves, like some minor thing, like you cut off my arm, and 10 million people in the future have arms who wouldn't have arms. Some crazy scenario. We can know logically it's the right thing to do, but doing it is difficult because it means I have to incur the negative. So when it comes to investing in the future or investing in logical processes, like you have two choices, the 5-year solution or the 20-year solution. And the 20-year solution only costs twice as much as the 5-year solution, but it's 4 times better, right? So we know that's the way to go logically. That we know we're going to presume we're going to be here in 20 years, and so obviously that's the payoff. That's the big winner. 50% more efficiency in going with the 20-year solution than the 5-year solution. But it costs more now, and that's always a problem. And so it'd be really great if we could somehow feel now the benefit we're going to receive from that 50% increase. That somehow we could make that smooth and easy to do the right thing instead of doing the immediate thing. And that's something to ponder. I don't have the obvious solution to the problem of how you put incentive carrots in front of people that haven't been made yet. The invisible future carrot doesn't have any use in your soup now. And we have to try to make those carrots real enough that they can make the soup. Now, the alternative scheme would be go through really hard times, create really gulag ourselves for 10 years, create a trust fund, and allow the trust fund to represent future carrots. And so it has past carrots in it, carrots we grew yesterday and saved, and now we can use that savings to give us the illusion of the future carrots and give us the investment capital to do the right thing. To take the 20-year answer because it's more expensive. Well, it doesn't matter because we got the money in the bank. We saved it. So we can go for the 20-year solution rather than the 5-year solution without any change in our current status because we already paid for it. We already gulagged for it, in a sense. But again, like I said, in an ideal world, yeah, this wouldn't be a problem. But we don't live in ideal worlds. We live in real worlds where everything has to be paid for and there's no free lunch and all that kind of bullshit. Um, and so these are trade-offs that are real and actual, and we are selfish, and we are time selfish. We're more selfish about today, right now, than we are this fuzzy future that I might not even exist in. I mean, telling me bargaining for some future good day is a lot different than bargaining for today's good day, because this one's in my hands, where that one, oh, I might die tomorrow, so who the hell cares about Thursday? Well, Thursday is tomorrow, but anyway, you get my drift. Anyway, so it's coming up with schemes or ways that we can create incentive capital to do the right thing, incentive carrots, and what we can make them out of that's safe. And so you have this choice of taxing money, borrowing money, or coming up with some other scheme. Now, something I might put in the other scheme, what towns often do is try to create a trust fund for future investment. So like they know they're going to need a fire truck, they start saving for it before they actually buy it so they can maybe cut off half the price with money they saved rather than a huge tax increase. So they try to, or another bond issuing or some other crap like that. So there are people that tend to try to be logical about it and try to spread the pain over a number of years without getting ripped off by, some rich guy who wants a profit on everything. So anyway, My thought on it, when I'm just giving it a little thought, was that it would be, the real problem is that we're not allowed to borrow money at no interest, and it's probably okay to have money, a little extra money in the economy now and then. So obviously the Fed pumps money into the economy, but it pumps it in this stupid way, like buying its own bonds or something, where it might be a lot more interesting if all the new money that went into circulation was investment capital money. So as the economy grows, there would be more investment capital, and that maybe a town could apply for that with a collateralized agreement. Yes, here's the assets of our town that haven't been mortgaged, that are owned outright, and you will gain possession of those assets in exchange for some cash so we can go do some work. And we're not going to pay any interest, though, beyond inflation, let's say. Let's just say no interest. It's cash. I don't see a real problem with that. I don't see problems with, as long as the cash goes back, right? So the real problem with borrowing it too is that we never pay back our debts. We just keep increasing the deficit, and so we just keep paying financing charges forever and ever and ever. So we rent, we don't mortgage, and that's really dumb. Again, that's not the long-term solution, that's a short-term solution, and it's very expensive to live hand to mouth like that. There's no efficiency, and there's no efficiency in how poor people live, obviously, and that's one of because they can't afford to be efficient. Efficiency costs more money, sometimes in the short run. You have to put up the efficiency money, the financing. So I think there are ways to do it, but I just don't think the way to do it is with a banking scheme that's just hiding what is really taking place, which is the money's been borrowed, and that the money's been borrowed at a huge liability to cash, which means that in a crisis you lose your capacity to do anything about the crisis. So that's my biggest complaint about what the Fed has done with quantitative easing, is quantitative easing creates a huge liability to cash, and if there is any time when there's a kind of a run on the bank, or there's a financial crisis, this is making the boat very thin, the wood on the boat very thin, and you're heading into the icebergs. So that's the argument here, is that you weaken the boat, and you might get away with it if you don't hit an iceberg, but if you hit an iceberg, this will finish you off. And that's the worst part of this, is not that you can't get away with it. You can get away with it, but the odds are you're going to pay it's not even that the odds are, you're just creating, you're opening the disaster door wider and wider. With each step in this direction, you open the opportunity to catastrophic failure, and that's the not too bright part of it. That's the not thinking of the future part of it. You're really loading the gun, putting the bullet in the gun, pulling the trigger back, cocking the gun, and pointing at the future's head and saying, I can get away with this game. And maybe you're not going to get away with it. So I think there are ways to do a trust, to do some other way for the government to provide investment capital, real cash, to do things without destroying cash. And me and Nick aren't, we really should get a real hard, cohesive understanding of what cash is. And I've sort of described it in pieces, but I mean, cash is a commodity. We've created a thing called a commodity, like gold or like something. We created it. It's synthetic. It's a synthetic commodity. And we created it, and it is the standard. And it is different than a digit. Cash doesn't just go away. Cash constantly moves forever. And so it has a different modality in an economy than a digit does. And a digit carries the liability problem, and it carries the interest problem. There's no interest on cash. Well, how else can it be described? And as I've stated before, is cash creates digits essentially. I mean, it liberates. They're liberated as cash equivalences, But what they really do is they convert a liability, they convert a claim on cash, a digit that was made by cash, into a claim on stuff. And as I've tried to explain, a claim on stuff can be complicated because it can take time to unravel that claim into cash again, because the claim is on future productivity, a future invention. I mean, how can you can't collect on a future invention yet. You can't ask him for the money back. It's in the future. You have to wait till the future gets here to get the money, to convert it back into cash. So it has a cash equivalency, but it doesn't have a cash equivalency on this particular day. It has a cash equivalency to some other time, and to resources that you can't necessarily, pies that you can't pull the pieces out of without breaking the pie. So there's things you can't take apart, like somebody can't just go to Google and say, give me my piece of Google. No, you'd have to convert Google into cash first to be able to give people their cash. And so I'm just saying that's the complication of cash, and cash is different than digits. And the inflation quality to cash doesn't come out if you're making synthetic digits. That's true. Inflation isn't necessarily created just by the fact that you have more bidders. Okay, bidders do create some inflation, and I'm saying quite obviously and overtly to you, okay, you can see the inflation of QE. It's in the stock market. It's been preposterously inflated. The money went to the stock market. The money didn't go to wheat or corn or automobiles or iPods or any of the other kind of consumption. It went into the stock market and preposterously has inflated it. So let's not pretend that it didn't create huge inflation. It created huge inflation. That inflation is now just stuck in the stock market. All right, that disease, that inflation can spread with no problem given the right circumstances. But don't pretend there wasn't inflation created. It was a huge inflation created. It just happens to be in the market that benefits the rich. And that inflation, now the rich own more assets. They have more claims on the pie, which means all of my claims have gotten smaller. The value of my stuff has gotten smaller because the value of their stuff has gotten bigger, and now they can outbid me for my life. They can outbid me for the property I live on. Let's say I pay more rent because they're going to pay a higher price for the property when it sells. The inflation is here, okay? It's just in the market right at this moment, but it can easily migrate into my life, because they're going to start buying with their capital. They're going to start bidding up the price of corn and bidding up the price of oil and bidding up the price of gold and bidding up the price of everything that I might, well, gold's a bad example because I don't own gold. Again, there's a difference between being on the good side of inflation in terms of owning the asset and being the guy who has to pay for the asset. So, inflation is great if you own the Van Goghs, right, and you're selling them. Inflation is horrible if you're trying to buy a Van Gogh. And that's the difference here. But the inflation is here. It did create it. So let's not pretend creating all those digits didn't create inflation. The inflation is in the stock market, and it's conceded by at least some economists in Britain that I did read, where they said the British stock market went up and their QE was only a few hundred billion. That few $100 billion created a 28% increase in their stock market. All right. Anyway, so the next question is, why wouldn't it create inflation if we took the money from the rich and gave it to the workers? And, well, first, it wouldn't create inflation because their salaries aren't going up. Let's see how to explain this the right way. The investment capital has the same character whether it's in the rich man's hands or the working class hands. I mean, it's money. It's claims on cash. And obviously, as you pointed out, poor people will buy more regular style stuff. But they're also just as capable of being aware of saving for a rainy day or investing in improvements in their house or all these really constructive kind of consumption. Not all consumption is waste consumption. So I don't even accept this premise that excess consumption is good. Our consumption must continually grow I don't buy those arguments as a premise. Those are arguments made for a rising stock market. Those are arguments made to keep the rich getting rich. And those aren't arguments about keeping our lives getting better. So clearly, if you gave the money to the Japanese workers, they would obviously save it. So it's not like this money would be turned into crap or wasted on crap in 1 year. The point is that the value of that equity could be put into the stuff that people use, which is cable and cameras and roads, and it would be built into the stuff we value as humans, the regular people, not marble floors, not imported this, not service crap, polished nails, all that kind of crap. It was more likely to be spent on things of common value to most people, and that investment will create more jobs, which will increase wages, which will have a cyclical effect of creating a better lifestyle for people who want to be productive and want to be reasonable in their consumption. So that's why it wouldn't be inflationary. I guess it would be my argument, is that the consumption is not going to be as focused and as narrow. And there's no reason for it to be inflationary in the sense that it's not more money, as you pointed out, and it certainly not necessarily liberates more cash, which is what inflation is related to. So I would argue that if you look at the how much money is in circulation, actually money's printed, and you go back to 1985 at 200 billion and now at 1.2 trillion, that you can see inflation right in that fact. That if that number had been kept to, say, 400 billion or 500 billion, that we probably would have had a lot less inflation. So that inflation is caused by printing money. Inflation isn't caused by higher salaries and all that kind of stuff. No, not as overtly. If you keep cash, the commodity, under control, keep it valuable, you won't have out of control inflation. It's clearly a way of controlling inflation. I'm just saying that I think if I was the Fed, this is the strategy I would have pulled right from the start. When, back in the Nixon years, when we were hitting 10% inflation, the simple solution to me would be tax people and burn the money. That would have been the simple solution to get rid of the inflation. So anyway, the next, inflation from extra wages year after year. Yeah, well, that's the question is if wages go up 3 times, if you create it doesn't matter where the standard is. I guess my point is, it doesn't matter what the wage base is, as long as the wage base relative to the amount of money in circulation. So in relative to the character of the commodity, cash, money, dollars, that's the only relationship that matters. So as long as those two are in sync, you're not going to have inflation. Yeah, I don't know how much further to go with that one. I mean, that one might be one for a separate video, because again, we're back to this, what really causes inflation, and and the argument of whether when you're bidding with surplus or borrowed dollars, or you have to bid with actually work income dollars. So earned money versus saved money or inherited money, and how this changes the bidding war. So if you give people an automatic increase in salary of surplus digits, and they lend these to people, and every year they have more of these digits, if the rich keep getting richer, the inflation of that is just as destructive, because they will outbid, they will loan the money to bidders, who can't afford, and the same bidding war is going to take place. So I don't think you can make an argument that having the money in the working class's hands is going to create more inflation, because it's already creating inflation now. But I'm saying that what's really creating inflation is printing cash. So there's the real problem. Okay. Understand how government pays for shit. Okay, so now it's the last page. I mean, we're back to this argument about, what money is and what digits are, and that these digits can just be manufactured. So I've sort of already made I put it in a little box over here. That the real problem with this fake digit creation is that the digits do have a liability to cash. The banks who gave us the money, let us lend their digits, okay, for the reserve money, are still liable. So I'm just saying, in any kind of crisis, they're going to have a liquidity problem, and they're going to have to use the cash, and that's the problem. That's the liability here. Is that when things are bad, there's going to be more claims on cash, not less claims on cash, and the government has no ability to fight the problem. It's given away its tools. It's burned its tools. So it's not going to be able to deal with a crisis. So again, I'll just use my thinning of the wood on the boat analogy, that you can get away with this thin balsa wood boat, but the likelihood is, again, I can't say likelihood. I'm just saying that from my perspective, there's way too much ice in this water for anybody to think this balsa wood boat is going to survive that ice field. Alright, must accept no more buying power. What the hell was that for? Oh, that the digits don't make a difference. So again, cash is different than digits. Cash is a commodity. It needs to have perceptual integrity. It's not just about how many. It's just about how much digit is in circulation. It's about the character and quality of those digits, and confidence in those digits, and whether there's counterfeit. If tomorrow somebody announces, they found a whole bunch of counterfeit gold, well, all of a sudden nobody's going to want to hold gold. Or gold's going to be a little scary, and I imagine gold is going to go down quite a bit. It's more complicated than just saying the digits have already been released and that's the same thing as money. It's not exactly the same thing, but as indicated in the bubble of the stock market, the inflation is there. It did create inflation, so there is no free lunch. You created the inflation. I don't really have to make an argument here. I'm just saying that when that inflation gets migrated into commodity price increases, then the normal people are going to feel it. When they start getting outbid for food, like I said, we're paying more for energy. We know that. You pay more than gold is worth. We know that, because these are investments, not because these things are intrinsically, that's their natural price. They're not at their natural price. They're at their unnatural price, because they've been used as an investment. And once things more vital to our existence become investments, the inflation is going to start eating into the average man's lifestyle. He's going to start noticing that he's paying way too much for food all of a sudden. Instead of 5% of his income, it's going to be 30% of his income, and that's going to be a real problem when he doesn't have 20% of his income to give away. So I think I've answered your questions, and like I said, some of this might need more. I think we just fundamentally still disagree over the fact that cash, dollars, are different than digits, and that claims on stuff is the difference. That a claim on stuff takes time to unravel to a cash standard. And the stuff doesn't need to be in cash, because the stuff is the real value of cash in the first place. Cash is just it's a transaction commodity. It has a specific narrow function. It expedites transactions between this stuff and that stuff by creating a standard monetized value for this stuff and that stuff. So it evaluates, it monetizes stuff, and allows for an easy transmission between those things as a commodity standard. But again, it can be, people can resort to it, and in that sense, once it becomes once there's a run on it, like a run on gold or something, yeah, if you bubble cash, well, you're going to have a real problem. Yeah, because the unbubbling is going to be messy. is everything starts to have to get sold, and you have to get rid of all this leverage and all this other stuff, and so there'll be a ton of bankruptcies, and you have to pay for them all in this short period of time. And that's a real problem too. So we haven't allowed things to really go bankrupt, right? So, we have this whole dam of bankruptcy waiting to be released that's going to destroy a ton of what people think is their wealth. I mean, all this bubble wealth in the stock market, it's just bubble wealth. It's going to go away when the bubble's popped. So anyway, till next time.